You grow up believing your story begins with you, your choices, your personality, your habits, your strengths. But as you get older, you realize something quieter has been shaping you all along. Something deeper than memory, older than emotion, older even than the stories you tell yourself about your life. It begins with your father, not the idea of him, not the expectations, not the version you wished he had been, but the real man, with all his shadows and unfinished battles. He didn't just raise you, he raised the voice you still hear in your head. And before we go deeper, if these stories help you understand yourself on a level no one ever explained growing up, make sure you're subscribed, because this space is for the people who want to finally understand the parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. Now, let's continue, because whether your father was present or absent, soft-spoken or loud, strict or withdrawn, patient or unpredictable, loving or painfully distant, he shaped you in ways you are only now beginning to see. A father teaches a child what strength looks like. He teaches them what failure means. He teaches them how to treat themselves in moments of doubt. He teaches them what to fear and what to trust. And maybe your father didn't say much, or maybe he said too much, or maybe he wasn't there at all. But his presence or his absence became the blueprint for the way you function emotionally. Because if he raised you with silence, you learned to silence yourself. If he raised you with pressure, you learned to fear mistakes. If he raised you with anger, you learned to walk on eggshells. If he raised you with unpredictability, you learned to overthink everything. If he raised you with impossible standards, you learned to chase perfection until it broke you. If he raised you with distance, you learned to question your worth. If he raised you with strength but no softness, you learned to mistake numbness for resilience. These lessons didn't feel like lessons. They felt like survival. You weren't learning who you were. You were learning who you had to be to keep the peace. And that's why, even now, you struggle with things other people find simple. You doubt your decisions. You apologize for existing. You think too much. You feel too little. You shut down when life asks you to rise. You stay small because somewhere deep inside, small felt safer. You didn't become this way by accident. You were trained. While other children were learning how to explore the world, you were learning how to predict it, how to monitor it, how to survive it. Your nervous system grew around his moods. Your identity formed around his limitations. Your emotional patterns echo the patterns he never healed. And now, as an adult, you wonder why you feel stuck. But you're not stuck because you're weak. You're stuck because your brain was wired for survival, not possibility. You weren't taught confidence. You were taught caution. You weren't taught emotional expression. You were taught emotional management. You weren't taught safety. You were taught self-protection disguised as personality. And here's the part no one ever tells you. Your relationship with your father became your relationship with yourself. If he was harsh, your inner voice is harsh. If he was demanding, you demand perfection from yourself. If he was absent, you abandon yourself emotionally. If he was unpredictable, your mind never learned how to settle. If he rarely praised you, you became addicted to external validation. If he never apologized, you learned to fear accountability. If he never shared his emotions, you learned to suppress your own until they became too heavy to carry. But what if this wasn't you? What if these weren't choices? What if these were inherited protections? Protections passed down not through DNA, but through tone, posture, silence, reactions. Tiny moments repeated over years that built the person you became. And now you're left with questions. Why can't I relax? Why do I overthink everything? Why do I crumble under pressure? Why do I feel guilty when I rest? Why does praise make me uncomfortable? Why do I feel responsible for everyone else's emotions? Why do I shrink in moments that require me to rise? Because your childhood trained you to. You weren't taught to thrive. You were taught to adapt. But here's the truth. What was once protection is now limitation. The habits that kept you safe as a child are the same habits that keep you stuck as an adult. Avoidance became anxiety. Silence became emotional distance. Hyper-independence became exhaustion. Overthinking became self-doubt. People-pleasing became self-abandonment. Numbness became your definition of strength. You didn't choose these patterns, but you're the one living with them. And healing begins when you finally see them clearly. It begins when you look at your father not as a symbol, not as a myth, not as the giant figure of childhood, but as a human being shaped by his own father, by his own fears, by his own upbringing, by a world that never taught him how to open up, how to be soft, how to be vulnerable, how to apologize, how to express love in ways a child could understand. This doesn't excuse anything, but it explains everything. And explanation is the first doorway to freedom. Because once you understand the origin of your emotional blueprint, you gain the power to redraw it. You begin to notice the moments where you act from old wounds rather than present truth, where your inner critic speaks with a voice that isn't yours, where your hesitation is just an old instinct trying to keep you safe, where your fear isn't fear, it's memory. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't come from one breakthrough. It doesn't come from one confrontation. It doesn't come from one dramatic transformation. Healing is slower, quieter, more intentional. It looks like choosing a new response in a familiar moment. It looks like saying no without guilt. It looks like expressing something small you once hid. It looks like asking for help without apologizing. It looks like resting without shame. It looks like telling the truth instead of keeping the peace. It looks like letting someone see you without shrinking. It looks like honoring your needs instead of abandoning them. These moments seem tiny, but they're not. They are rebellion. They are reprogramming. They are the unraveling of generations of inherited silence. Because this isn't just about you. This is generational. You are breaking patterns your father never questioned, because no one taught him how. You are learning emotional tools he never received. You are healing wounds he carried but never had words for. You are becoming someone your lineage has never seen before. And that's not betrayal, that's evolution. Because the story didn't begin with you, but it can transform with you. And one day, when you look back, you will realize something powerful. You were never weak because of your father. You only believed you were. Your weakness was the first sign of your awakening, the quiet beginning of your transformation, the moment your soul whispered that you were meant for more than survival. And now that you see it, you can finally choose the life that was always waiting for you. Not the life shaped by his wounds, not the life limited by his fears, not the life defined by his silence, but the life you build with your own strength, your own clarity, your own voice. Your story continues with you, and this time, you get to decide who you become. There comes a moment, subtle, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you begin to feel a shift inside you. Not a dramatic awakening, not a sudden breakthrough, but something softer, a feeling that the life you've been living no longer fits the person you're becoming. It's the moment you realize you've been carrying someone else's definition of strength, someone else's expectations, someone else's fears, someone else's silence. For the first time, you begin to wonder, who am I beneath everything I learned to be? This question marks the beginning of reconstruction, the rebuilding of a self that never had the space to fully exist. Because a father shapes more than your behaviors. He shapes your emotional architecture, your thresholds, your beliefs about love, your beliefs about effort, your sense of safety, your relationship with ambition, your relationship with failure, your relationship with yourself. And now that you see these patterns, the task ahead isn't to blame, it's to rebuild. Rebuilding begins with unlearning. Unlearning the idea that silence equals strength. Unlearning the belief that emotions must be hidden. Unlearning the instinct to shrink when life demands that you rise. Unlearning the reflex to apologize for your needs. Unlearning the pressure to be perfect, to feel worthy. Unlearning the habit of predicting other people's reactions before expressing your own truth. These patterns once kept you safe. They now keep you small. And the hardest part is this: your mind doesn't want to let go, because letting go feels dangerous. It feels like stepping into a world without the rules that once protected you. But growth always begins where familiarity ends. So you move carefully, one emotional brick at a time, rearranging the structure of your inner world. At first, rebuilding feels uncomfortable. You try to set boundaries, and guilt suffocates you. You speak your truth, and your voice shakes. You express emotion, and panic rises inside you. You slow down, and shame whispers you're being lazy. You rest, and the old voice says you haven't earned it. These aren't signs that you're failing. These are signs that you're healing. Because the body reacts to safety the same way it reacts to danger when safety is new. Your nervous system has to relearn what peace feels like. And that takes time, but with each moment of courage, something incredible begins to happen. You start hearing a new voice inside you, not the voice shaped by fear, not the voice shaped by silence, not the voice shaped by criticism or absence, a voice shaped by awareness, a voice shaped by truth, a voice shaped by the future you're building, not the past you survived. But rebuilding isn't just about learning new habits. It's about grieving the ones you never got to have. You grieve the softness you weren't taught. You grieve the safety that wasn't modeled. You grieve the emotional presence you needed but didn't receive. You grieve the childhood version of you who tried so hard to be enough. You grieve the teenager who learned to swallow emotions because speaking felt dangerous. You grieve the adult who spent years mistaking survival for identity. Grief doesn't mean you hate your father. Grief means you're acknowledging the weight you carried alone. And once that grief finds space to breathe, something else emerges: compassion. Not the kind that excuses or minimizes, but the kind that understands. You begin to see that your father's distance had a source. His silence had a story. His anger had a root. His inability to show love had an origin. His perfectionism came from fear, not superiority. His unpredictability came from his own lack of emotional tools. Maybe he, too, was just a child who grew up without guidance. Maybe he never learned emotional language. Maybe vulnerability was never modeled for him. Maybe approval was something he chased his entire life. Maybe he spent years trying to outrun his own father's shadow. Understanding this doesn't erase the impact, but it helps you release the idea that his limitations were your fault, because they never were. And this understanding gives you something powerful, the ability to choose differently. Where he avoided emotion, you learn to name yours. Where he feared vulnerability, you learn to share. Where he hid his struggles, you learn to seek support. Where he demanded perfection, you learn to allow mistakes. Where he stayed silent, you learn to speak. Where he lived in survival, you learn to build a life. This is how generational patterns break, not with dramatic rebellion, but with quiet awareness and intentional change. You become the person your younger self needed, and the person your father never had the chance to be. And with time, something profound happens. You stop living in the emotional echo of your father. You stop reacting from wounds you didn't create. You stop inheriting battles that were never meant for you. You stop carrying the weight of his unfinished stories. Slowly, gently, steadily, you become the author of your own life. And one day, without forcing it, without expecting it, without even realizing when it happened, you will look at yourself and see someone new, someone strong, but soft, someone ambitious, but self-compassionate, someone fearless, but emotionally aware, someone grounded, but expressive, someone free. Because the true hidden impact of a father is not just what he leaves in you, but what you choose to transform. You are not the end of the story you were given. You are the beginning of the story you're building. A story defined not by survival, but by evolution. And this is only the beginning.